in my normal update post, we're kind of coming, the block trades team is kind of coming to conclusion on what I guess we could call first phase of our HiveMind work. And that's been broadly speaking, that's been a bunch of different activities we've been doing in parallel. And this is, for, months of time. So one of the things we've been doing, of course, is moving a bunch of Hive D functionality into HiveMind, and that was primarily to lower the memory footprint of Hive D itself, and that's all done. We've also been moving a lot of HiveMind functionality that was implemented in Python into SQL to improve the performance, and that's pretty much done. And we were doing things like adding database indexes to improve SQL, the query performance and things like that. Again, all done. Other things we did, or we added support for decentralized lists to replace centralized blacklists and centralized muting systems. There's still a little bit of work going on there. Just we had some misunderstandings about the spec, and those changes we've got changes underway now actually I think they're done. We're mainly in the testing phase with that now. So I expect that to be done in the next week, if it's not already done, and no one's told me yet. And then other things, of course, we were doing a lot of general code refactoring in this whole process, and that's also kind of done. And then finally, we added a lot of tests to test the API calls and the responses, just so that in the future, as changes get made, it was really very easy to break things in the old system because there was no tests. You could easily make a change that broke something and not be aware of the breakage. When I started doing a little bit of coding at the end, I found out just how valuable those tests were, because I was frequently breaking things I had no idea about until the test told me that. So the testing, adding tests itself isn't done. We're still working on that because it's kind of a large task, but it's something that just goes on slowly over time. And of course, as we add new functionality, new tests will need to be added with those new functionalities as well. But like I said, those tasks are kind of, that phase is pretty much winding down now. And so now we're sort of moving on to new tasks. One of the bigger tasks that's underway right now is we're working on this Hive D plugin to experiment with using that as a means of getting the data out of Hive D and into HiveMind. So basically, it's a push system where Hive D writes directly to the HiveMind's Postgres database instead of a pull system like we have now, where the HiveMind indexer makes API calls to Hive D in order to get the data it needs. The main driver for that is that the current API calls supported by Hive D are somewhat slow and computationally intensive, just because of the way they're implemented. But if we do it from a push system instead, where Hive D directly writes the data, I believe we can eliminate most of that computational load. And then further on, we can actually use HiveMind to actually replace some of the API calls that are currently supported by Hive D that are computationally expensive for Hive D to do. Partly just because Hive D doesn't save auxiliary data that it needs to properly answer the API queries, whereas it's easy to add that kind of auxiliary data inside HiveMind, because it's easy to add new types of data, related data, to a database. And also, HiveMind is probably better suited to being an API query system because it's got a lot of Postgres itself has a lot of stuff for managing parallel queries and things like that in a very efficient way. So that's one of the big tasks we're doing right now, and that's also the lead into this concept of modular HiveMind. And the concept of modular HiveMind that we also want to work on is this idea of allowing developers to create versions of HiveMind that just create and store the data they need, and not everything under the sun. So these modular HiveMinds can actually become sort of second layer apps themselves if you tie front end in front of them. I mean, essentially, HiveMind is the existing thing we call HiveMind is essentially a backend for a large extent. It's a backend for things like condenser and ecency and peakd. So just think of, you can imagine Splinterlands could use a similar system, for instance. But the idea behind the modular HiveMind is there's bunch of common functionalities behind all those different APIs in terms of how they get data from the blockchain and store it and serve up that data. So that's what really modular hive mind is about. So as part of that, let's see what other things we're looking at doing now. And also, I guess one more thing about the modular hive mind is it's also one of the ways we're looking at possibly building a smart contract system at the second layer on top of hive mind. So that's another reason why it's fairly important to us. So we are starting to explore some of the issues related to creation of modular hive mind. Like I said, one is this ongoing task to pump data from Hive D directly into hive mind. Another one we're going to look at is on the Hive D side. We're looking at ways of getting some more information that's currently not into Hive D into a modular hive mind type database, and we're going to explore some of the efficiency concerns related to that work. So as an example, what I'm talking about here is there's accounting data that gets generated inside Hive D, and some of that accounting data is never really shared with hive mind. So right now it'd be difficult, for instance, to write some code in hive mind to act as compute balances, because it actually lacks some of the information it needs to compute balances on its own, strictly from virtual operations and operations it has that it gets. So one of the ways we could supplement this data is simply to add some additional virtual operations that then will automatically get streamed to hive mind as part of this normal hive mind indexing process. But creating additional virtual operations could potentially cause various forms of loading on hive mind itself. I mean, there's bloating of the operational history, and of course there's actually just other data and computational concerns associated with it. So my thought is it's not going to be too significant, but we're gonna experiment with that and just verify that introducing that kind of data doesn't cause any performance problems or things like that. So that's going on, and let's see if I can remember any of the other things right off the top of my head. There are other things going on, but that's things that come to my mind at the moment. So I'll pass it on at this point.
Okay, cool. Well, lots of stuff as usual. So speaking of HiveMind, we spoke with a while ago, I think it was probably 10 dev meeting ago, about the possibility of having a language tag in HiveMind to tag any post, which would be done at the chain level. Basically, when you submit a post, we would add to the JSON metadata of the post the language. That would be totally a front-end thing. There is no guarantee that the post, if I say French, the post is actually in French or anything. It's just a way for the front-end to be able to filter and offer a, let's say, French-only or Polish-only front-end experience. And since we didn't have a lot of follow-up on that, because we needed to wait for HiveMind to be more stabilized. I don't know if you feel like it's stable enough to add new features now or not.
Yeah, in fact, I should have said that in passing. I meant to say that. Now that we sort of completed the first phase of the sort of larger work on HiveMind overhaul, we're definitely opening up now, I think, to either implementing such some smaller features ourselves, or at least encouraging other people to do so. And maybe I should say a little more on that point. So I mean, generally speaking, because we were making so many changes to HiveMind, and it wasn't easy for other people, I think, to really work on HiveMind during the first phase. And I feel like that's really changing now, because the rate of pace of changes will slow in terms of big changes. It might actually seem faster to some people because they'll see new features, but from looking at just the raw code changes, the pace will definitely slow. And also, along with that, now that we've been trying to set up better coding practices for group participation in HiveMind development. I mean, HiveMind originally was, from what I can tell, was mostly created by one person, and you got to respect that. But at the same time, it means it wasn't necessarily well organized for a lot of people to work on at once. So in testing is an example of that, lacking a good testing system It's never good to not have a good testing system, but it's really dangerous when you have a lot of people working in code together, because every person doesn't know what the functionality of every other person's code is. They usually don't have that time, and the testing system puts in some guardrails to catch those kind of catch mistakes that somebody can introduce just because they don't know everything about the code they're working in. So long story short, we have done a lot to help make it easier for more people to work in the code, and we're still doing some things along those lines. In fact, one of those is, I guess, coming up in our next topic, or one of our topics along the line, which is documentation. So might as well mention that in passing too now. So we, yeah, I'm just jumping around a little bit here, but it's related, right? On the documentation front, we're thinking that what we're going to do is introduce basically standard practice to document in the code, and then use something like Open API probably to generate automatic web, HTML type in web documentation from the code itself. That'll kind of make sure that that'll kind of make it easier for us to be sure that each new API gets documented, and it'll be easier to spot when it's not. And it also encouraged the developers themselves to create documentation, or at least initial documentation for their calls, although obviously people can come back afterwards and improve it.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. So the main idea about that is the who, when, how. On the when, I guess we can do it now that HiveMind is open for business.
Yeah, I think it's open immediately. So we're assigning one person, I guess, on our team to this is one of the people who've been working on our test systems, our developing tests. So I think it's kind of important that whoever does the documentation is somewhat familiar, has done testing. I know Inertia, who did a lot of the documentation for up to this point for Hive, was always found himself testing the API calls to different extents in order to make accurate documentation. So I think that's a good thing. People we do have documenting, a lot of them, it's great if they can also do testing, but of course that's not always going to be the case. Sometimes we just need somebody who can clean up English and things like that too, because the testers may not be native English speakers, for examples, but of course the documentation itself is written in English. So there's a mix of capabilities we want. So our guy on this is not he's Polish. His Polish is his native language, so it would certainly probably be useful to have some English speaker review and make minor corrections as it goes.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that like regular people could probably do.
Yeah.
Regular, I mean non-developer, because you just need to review the actual grammar. Although we need to then have counter reviews, which becomes kind of a heavy process. But yeah, so okay, I guess I'll finish documentation, then I'll come back to the language tag. So in documentation, speaking of Inertia, I just wanted to bring a shout out to him because he started a new proposal. So if you want to check that out, he also started to work on a few issues that I created because I think it was a month ago. I went through the documentation and went through everything that needed to be done and made a ton of issues. And he started to assign himself to a few of those. So documentation is getting along. And on the follow-up, I don't know if Inertia was the person that Gandalf was mentioning, or if it's someone else.
No, I think Gandalf was probably talking about somebody on our team he wanted to talk to first and just be sure that they were comfortable working on it.
Yeah. On my end, I feel like there would be too many cooks in the kitchen, so I dismissed mine. And yeah, that's about it for the documentation work. For the language tag in HiveMind, I wouldn't mind championing that change because it touches a bit of the layer 2 and a bit of the front end, and I feel like that's not going to be too hard to synchronize between the front end and the back end. On the when and on the how, it'll depend on a bit of how easy to tame HiveMind is, but I'm guessing probably in the next month or two.
What was the falling? Sorry, what'd you mean? Did you say
the,
following?
well, I mean, following the whole idea. It does depend on how quickly front-end wants to integrate that feature and how useful it would be to them. But yeah, basically, unless anyone else wants to champion this, I'll probably take care of it and see it through.
Okay. Yeah,
assuming people are fine with it, which is also
yeah. I mean, I think probably the first thing is going to be to spec out exactly how it works. I'm not sure we have a clear spec yet.
Yeah, I think it would mostly be a pretty native implementation with adding some metadata to a post when you create it.
So are we talking? Okay, so I mean, a couple questions come to mind and all that. Are we considering just using tags as the metadata? Are you thinking alternative metadata besides tags?
Alternative, aka the actual JSON metadata that's inside of the post, not tags.
Okay, is there any reason not to use tags? I guess that's another question.
Well, I guess tags work, but I feel like it's a bit of a hack. I mean, tags are definitely. I'm on the fence.
I mean, I'm not sure they are. We can.
Yeah,
it's subject to argument as to whether
yeah,
they're hacked.
I know it's very. I'm very much on the fence with that because I dislike having to force everyone to add a tag for that, but at the same time, it's very.
Well, I mean, and you wouldn't necessarily force everyone to use a tag too, right? We could have a default for English since that is probably the default language.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, but then, yeah, I'm on the fence with that. Either a tag or something like this. I'm just, yeah, I guess both work. Yeah, I'm fine with both. I just need to figure out how the front end and the actual user want to do that. Maybe a tag would be the easiest, but and then we could have like a window at the bottom of the front end where you could like select a language and it would auto add a tag at the end of the post.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely that would work. Yeah, basically something like this, and then add it to the whole HiveMind grinder to ingest it.
Yeah, so we can. I mean, we could look at one of the nice things about if we do use that approach, I suppose, is we probably already have some APIs that reason over tags. So maybe we could use some of those, or maybe we could extend their reasoning ability over tags, and to supply whatever API calls that a client might want, a web client might want related to that, like filtering on language to see only specific languages and things like that.
I think the only reasoning where you wouldn't want tags is that it's way easier for. I mean, it's harder for people to set that tag, even though the post is not in that language. But on the other hand, anyone can like just go to the dropdown and select it. So yeah,
yeah, I don't think we need to. I'm not really concerned about someone being deceptively tagging. I don't think that's much of an issue.
So yeah, I'm on the fence with that. I guess it's the kind of stuff that we need to discuss with everyone.
Yeah, I mean, and I can see other things you could do too. I mean, on the front end side, you could have the front end could just take a look at a post, and assuming there's no tag, it could take its best guess about what the language is and tag it. For instance, it's not impossible. Backend could do that too. For instance,
I mean,
Hive might sit there and just go through all the old posts, for instance, and someone could offer could have some kind of extended tagging, which goes beyond the tagging actually stored into the blockchain to sort of identify language.
Yeah, I know that's what HiveSQL does. They have a paid service to identify language, so that could definitely work.
Yeah, and that's I know he's open sourcing that. If maybe it's already all open sourced, actually, I guess I'm not sure.
Not sure. As far as I know, the service is open, but it's not open source because it's kind of.
I think he said he was planning on it. I think there was some issue that prevented him from doing it immediately. But is Arcane still online? I think he's here.
He's not responding.
Okay.
I mean, my guess is that from knowing a bit, the code is not that useful because you need the whole infrastructure that is built around it.
Okay. So it's not just. I figured he just might be using some particular analysis engine to recognize language.
Oh yeah. On that point, it's a paid service. I think we talked about it in Hive Developer Meeting 10 or 9. I have to go back.
Okay.
But yeah, that's it for that. Now on to my stuff. So recurrent transfers. Yay, now again. So I just want to discuss once and for all to know if we want to remove the failing recurrent transfers or not. So I looked into it, and it's not really doable to have to make the person pay RC as it goes, because it's a plugin and it basically ties into it. I mean, it's possible, but not without big changes to the RC system. I don't really think it's the scope of the feature, and the same applies to paying a lot of RC ahead of time, because you can set a number of RC per operation, and you cannot say like, this operation, by the way, this operation will execute 20 times. It's just like, this operation weigh that much, and then you pay it. So it's a bit hard. Well, it's a bit hard / not in scopes to do variable RC cost for RC, which is not that bad. But the idea is, should we just remove it and let it? And if it fails like 10 times in a row, failing means that the user who created a recurrent transfer cannot pay what is due. Should, after like, let's say 10 times, the recurrent transfer be removed, or should we just let it run its due, because virtual operations are not that bad when you think about it. And also, it allows us to not have to keep account of how many times it failed in the actual object.
So, sorry, and you're in the middle of this, and it's been a while for me. What's the reason for the fail? I guess that's
the reason for the fail is, let's say you do recurrent transfers of 10 Hive a month, and after the third month, you no longer have Hive.
Okay, so you run out of funds to make the transfer.
Yeah, exactly. And so then the times come where you are supposed to do the recurrent transfer, and if you cannot, then what happens? And that's a big idea.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I guess my instinctive feeling is the transfer just doesn't happen.
Oh yeah, I mean, it wouldn't happen, but the question is,
do we mark? Are you saying do we create a virtual operation to indicate it didn't happen?
Yeah, I think that's important, because front ends and whatever will want to know what happened. That's important.
Well, I mean, nothing happened at some level. I mean, we could record that. I guess what you're saying is what we can record is the fact that there was insufficient funds to make a transfer, a scheduled transfer.
The problem with that is that, let's say someone says, I make a recurrent transfers that last for 10 years and I want it to execute every day. I think the minimum is 1 hour or 1 day. I think it's 1 hour. That means a ton of virtual operations that will just run its course forever, or just someone that dies or loses their keys and whatever.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. There's several options, I guess, in there. One is just we don't say anything and it just silently fails. Another one is we can report every failure. A third one is we can report the first failure, and with the idea that generally someone could see that and know that there's likely to be more failures and we don't need to report them, and then we just report any future successes.
So the first solution cannot really work, because if we don't say anything, so there is a system in it where we don't want to process that many recurrent transfer per block, because it involves a query and it updates the balances and stuff. So it's like,
okay, so you're shoving them on to the next block.
Yeah. Basically, we can only process. I mean, it's not we can, but like we set an artificial limit of 100,000 processed recurrent transfer per block, so that sometimes it will happen where it's the time for the recurrent transfer to be processed, but nothing happens, not because the user ran out of funds, but because it was processed into the next block. So to that end, we have to mark if it failed or not. The second solution, where we mark it all the time, that's what it is discussed. The third time, the third one, why not? Where we actually mark it as failed once, and then we only set it back to on afterwards. And then there is a fourth solution, which is one that's currently implemented, where if it fails more than 10 times, we remove the recurrent transfer altogether, and it's no longer processed.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, there's several options there.
So yeah.
Yeah, I was actually, yeah, and I actually almost mentioned something like what you're saying, although I was considering even once it fails once, it stops.
Yeah, I felt it was okay to give a bit of leeway.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was in debate with this with Bartek. Let me just see what Bartek was saying. Yeah, and basically Bartek wants me to do the RC thing, which we cannot do right now.
Oh, okay. So I know Bartek was also asking about a related issue we could talk about too, which is he really would prefer if we could have this implemented using this system that was set up.
Record actions, yes.
Yeah. Have you had a chance to look into that and see if it can be done that way?
I looked at it today. So it's doable, I think. I haven't actually coded anything, but I read the code and it looks like pretty much, standard. It's very much SMT code.
Oh, what code? I'm sorry.
It's very much SMT code.
What's SMT code?
SMT, sorry.
Oh, SMT code. Okay.
So right now it's not used, which is, it's okay, I guess. We are planning to add.
Yeah, I mean, I understood it's not tested.
Yeah, it's not tested is what I'm saying. And also, I don't actually get why. When looking at the code, apart from the fact that it's like notified and it adds a bit more logging and stuff, I don't really see the advantage of doing this over just adding a new processor.
Okay. Maybe, I don't know if Bartek is Bartek online?
Yes, I am. Actually, my idea was to learn more this feature, originally designed for some SMGs. And by design, this feature had to support splitting large portions of data into several blocks. So this problem should be solved by this implementation, but of course, I'm not sure if it was implemented accordingly. We should check it. Otherwise, we will need each time when we are trying to introduce some repeating feature to the blockchain.
We'll have to write that code again. Yeah.
Follow the code again and solve it each time for several other things. And we did it in the past, for example, for removing proposals. Such removing was removed lately, so the problem disappeared. but it is also for other parts still active. For example, we will soon have to implement removing votes for expired accounts. So I personally would prefer to do research for someone, and I think Ho could be a good candidate here, as he probably knows SMT code partially and did some work already in Hive to do such research and make for us some report. And if he will find that this code is completely not ready and completely not usable for our purposes, of course, and we all, of course, can understand it because this is timid code. So we can imagine what it can contain. So,
yeah.
But I think my intention is to implement some general purpose solution which will allow us to in the future to implement such things instead of adding each time some calls to block processing code and other splitters which avoid blockchain bloat in some cases. So.
Yeah, I see your point.
Yeah, that makes sense. So would you mind taking a look at that and see if I mean, there's two levels of that. Obviously, you can just take a look at it at the front and see if it makes sense to possibly use, and even, more valuable if it does look like it might work. If you could actually try changing your code to use it and see, that's an actual test that we have the a concrete test to see if it really works.
Yeah. Worst case, I'll just recode it because it's not that complicated. It's just that there is
Yeah,
a lot
so
of
yeah, you can
multiple
also fix
operations.
it. That's another possibility. If there's a problem, you can fix it.
But yeah, I don't mind checking it. I mean, we have like multiple months before the next hard fork, so I can definitely look into it.
And it seems like it's, I mean, from what I'm getting from Bartek, it's a functionality that's going to come up again and again, and I guess that's why they created it.
Yeah, when you look at the block processing, there is like probably 6 to 7 functions who pretty much do the same thing, which is like do stuff when the block is executed, like expire proposals, pay proposals, move stuff from the burn stuff from the known account, move stuff from Steam DAO to Hive fans, stuff like this. And now recurrent transfers and expire recurrent transfers from the top of my head. And then we'll have all of their expirations, like expire vote, expire proposal vote. So definitely something that we need for the infrastructure in the future. Anyways, enough about me rambling. So the main idea is, we haven't had a solution to it. Should we remove failing recurrent transfers or not? I would go for yes. It's
I'm okay with it, I guess. I guess, does any of this, I don't know if this use of this mechanism we're talking about has any impact on that or not.
No.
Okay, then my own feeling is I see no reason why we shouldn't allow them to be removed if they continue failing. I think that's perfectly acceptable.
Okay, neat. Okay, great. So our next point is actually use recurrent actions for recurrent transfers. So that's done. Okay. So when I was working on the recovery account virtual operation, I found that we don't actually have a way to tell when if your account is like being recovered. Not being recovered, but like your recovery account is being changed. You don't have a way to know when that's going to happen unless you go back to the actual block where it happened.
The original request, you mean?
Yeah. So basically, it's kind of a security risk where you may have a request pending where you don't know about it. So let's say your account is compromised, someone makes that request, then you get your keys back or something, and then you still have that pending thing. So and also it would be good on the front ends to just display it. So it is like, should we return it to?
So are you talking about? Okay, so I mean, I just want to be sure I understand this. So when you request, you initially make a transaction to request your account recovery, right?
Yeah.
And to initiate the transfer. Well, I mean, there's a couple steps, if I recall correctly, in the recovery process. I think you make some kind of transaction, and then the person who's acting, the entity, the account that's acting as your your recovery agent has to then do a transaction too, I believe, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. What I care about is mostly changing your recovery agent.
Okay, so you're talking about changing your recovery agent. Got it. Not requesting an account recovery.
Yeah,
okay, so when you request a recovery agent to change, there's a time delay from when the change actually takes place, and it sounds like, and is there also some chance for it to fail?
No.
Okay, so you can request a change. It just takes a certain amount of time, and that's how it works.
Yeah, exactly. Unless you cancel it, obviously.
So when you request the change, that actually marks the change request, the actual change request itself. So front ends could already report that a change request is made if HiveMind just kept track of it, so that they could ask the question, and they could always say, yeah, there was a request change made, I suppose, and it could include the time and when it's likely to happen. So you don't necessarily need a virtual operation, as far as I can see so far. You really don't even need one for when it actually happens, I guess, because that's if there's no chance for failure.
Well, yeah, but it's still the thing is, we have a virtual operation for every other, let's say, account change or well, yeah, basically, well, not account change, but like.
Are you talking about? So there's another issue. Maybe you were talking about impact. So when somebody does an operation that impacts an account, there's HiveMind builds a record up, and Hive does most of the work right now, but of what accounts are impacted by that operation. Yeah. Are you referring to the impact side rather than creation of a virtual operation?
Okay, so no, I'm referring to, well, yes, I have a merge request for that, but I'm also asking if we should have either in HiveMind or in Hive a way to have a timer which is like next recovery account change, which is just a timer, and usually it's going to be like set to Unix 0. But
so
when it's set,
I'm trying to figure out what you mean next. So you're talking about having a way to know when the account recovery is going to, I mean, when the agent change is going to happen.
Yeah.
Or some API call to report that the agent change will happen on this date, right?
I wouldn't have it in like a specific API call, but just add it to the account object.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you add it to the account object, you still have to have some way to get that data, right? I mean, the front end can't read the HiveMind database.
For most of the accounts, it's irrelevant because most of them won't have it. Account has something like last owner update and last account update. So last owner update is useful for you to see if your owner key has changed. And maybe we should have something similar for recovery agent change to keep it consistent. But I'm not sure if it's necessary in the era of HiveMind.
Yeah, I mean, anything like that, I don't really see a strong need for that to be done anywhere in Hive itself. All the information necessary is it sounds like is in the initial operation. There's no other side effect computation needed. So I mean, it feels like ultimately we're talking about how does a front end know when this happens, and there's a couple ways we could do that. We could add an API to Hive itself that says that. We could add an API to HiveMind that reports that. It doesn't have to be a new API. We could introduce additional information into one of the existing APIs, which I think is sort of what Gandalf was getting at there. And then, I mean, probably a bigger question is, from my point of view, is what should front ends do with this information?
So you can just show it, and when it comes close to it, they could like put an alert. Like, I know.
Yeah, I mean, and that's fine. That's so, you know, I mean, even I'm talking details of where would they likely show it, and are they just, how are they gonna be? Is this just something that they want to know every time they check an account, I guess, or is this basically just going to be like additional profile information?
I guess they would show it in like the wallet page if you see in like user story.
Okay, yeah, I think the wallet page is a logical place for it.
So basically,
it's tied to financial security and account security.
Yeah, exactly. So when they load that, they could add like your recovery agent will change in X days, or just not show it at all if you're not.
It feels like this could fit in the profile.
Yeah, definitely.
Ticket profile call.
Okay, I'll add a yes HiveMind profile to the notes.
Okay.
And then there were.
I'm coming back about virtual operation about account recovery. Virtual operation are about to notify that there is some operation occurring into the blockchain that will require an update of state tables like accounts or comments. It's not just about displaying information.
No, of course it's not just about displaying information, but the point is, it comes to the question of how much. I mean, when we see an operation, something that's watching that operation stream, sometimes it can make relatively clear information on its own about making its own decisions about that information without input from Hive, and other times it can't. I mean, in this case, here's the trade-offs involved in this. If it's known that the time delay for this is always the same, then it doesn't have to be explicit that we say when it happens. On the other hand, if we want to have the external component that's reporting when it's going to happen be not be tied to that kind of knowledge, then it's going to need to know it from Hive D is going to have to tell it. So if we want to totally separate HiveMind from Hive D, then we consider, well, maybe we should do a virtual operation to signal when it happens, so that the HiveMind or whatever other system's watching it doesn't have to know that it takes 30 days. And therefore, if we change that logic in the Hive D code, then HiveMind doesn't need to say, well, this operation happened at this point in time, so the delay is this amount, and this other one happened at a later time when we changed the delay, and so it needs to know it's going to take this amount of time. So there's definitely decoupling issues that come into this as to how much implicit knowledge we want to build into external things like HiveMind as to computation being done by Hive D. So that, I mean, that's certainly an argument for a virtual operation if you think it's likely we're going to want to change this delay, for instance.
Yeah, it's to avoid duplicating logic.
Yeah, but it's a really simple logic in this case. So there's
it, even if it's simple.
Well, it's but it's not just simple. It's not just duplicating logic. We're actually going to generate additional data now that we've got to store. Mm-hmm. Where if it's not all virtual operations wind up getting stored as actual, they're going to bloat the blockchain.
It's not a virtual operation that occurs every 3 blocks or 3 seconds.
Yeah, and you can also argue, so you can make arguments that in this particular case, it's not information that's significant enough in terms of bloat that it matters. So I can certainly see the argument for virtual operations. I'm definitely not going to dispute that.
Cool.
Yeah, and then I feel like I'm for virtual operation as well, but I'm biased because I already did the code.
Yeah, I mean, so
yeah,
I don't think it's harmful in this case. I see no harm in doing it in this case because, as Arcane just pointed out, it isn't a lot of data.
Yeah, I feel like the trade-off is like very small, and it adds more consistency.
Yep.
So okay, that's about it for it. Now we have to stuff.
So I mean, just to make that data useful, of course, it's still going to require further work.
Yeah, but I think the data is mostly for software like HiveMind or HiveSQL.
Well, I mean, yeah, but I mean, those things are good. I mean, in order for a front end to usefully use this information, somebody would need to somehow, modify Git profile or something in order to make it available to a front end.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's still work to be finished, I think, before this becomes a useful feature.
Yeah, but I mean, this feature will not go live until anyways. So
next hard fork.
And yeah, it doesn't need. Yeah. Does it need a hard fork to add an idea?
It doesn't need a hard fork to add a virtual operation because it's not a change. It's not a change of consensus. It's just reporting how consensus is operating.
So you could technically add that to the next minor thing. Yeah. Okay. Anything else on this?
I don't have anything. Anybody else does?
Okay, neat. Then proposals. Guilty Party suggested those to me. So basically, when we made at the last hard fork, we made the possibility to remove, to change a bunch of parameters from the proposals, and basically we allowed to remove the price down. He also proposed to be able to update the dates down.
Yeah, I actually thought we could do that, to be honest. I was kind of surprised when I found out.
So I think my initial thoughts at the time... I thought
we talked about it.
Yeah, I know, me too. And I think my thought was like, it's not necessary because you can just delete it if you if you feel like you've reached like your correct points. But I'm like, might as well also not encourage
but I think
work.
I guess it's kind of a related problem to the...
Yeah, I feel like it's like one or a way or another. So.
It's like a way to guarantee that what you're saying you're going to do.
Yeah, true.
I mean, you can always not lower your proposal amount too. You can just say, I'm not going to use as much as I get, but it requires trust factor. Just like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So speaking of which, there is the idea of having a cutoff proposal, which was done for the Hive tips proposal. which could actually be done in a trustless manner, which I feel like would add more trust to a lot of this stuff, where you're, because right now you're
the maximum amount that you'll get from the proposal.
Yeah, it's
because
essentially
we need that potentially because the proposal isn't always voted in at all times.
Yeah, exactly. That's the use case it solves. So if we all feel okay with this, I'll get working on those two changes.
Yeah, I'm okay with both of those.
Because I feel like it adds just a little bit of usefulness that can. That's why.
Yeah, it allows you to.
It's easy wins.
Yeah, low hanging fruit.
Yeah, very much. And then we have a question by Good Karma. I read it. Inter-blockchain communication protocol, how complicated is it to add support for IBC, inter-blockchain communication protocol? Or what things to consider to allow communication with other protocols? Yeah, I'll let you answer
I'm
that.
comfortable taking that one, I guess. The answer is, of course, first, it depends on exactly what you mean by inter-blockchain communication. There's a couple different things I can think of that can mean. In the general case, I mean, the most useful case, it would talk about a way that you could move tokens back and forth between blockchains in a somewhat transparent manner, so that you could send some Bitcoin to Hive, and then there becomes some token on Hive that you can then transmit to someone else, and then they could send it from their Hive account back to Bitcoin and get out Bitcoin. That problem is really hard to solve. It's not impossible, but it's not a minor task by any means. Lots of people would be really happy to get it done. It's a big deal for a lot of use cases. So I will say that's not really a solved problem right now. Part of there's multiple ways to do it. In some ways you can do it fairly clearly and have been done. And those ways rely on some amount of trust, usually some kind of multi-key, so the two approaches generally that I'd say for doing that can be divided into two categories. One is you basically have an additional monitor that can follow the logic of a stream of the other blockchain and know, based on what it sees, that a transfer has taken place. So this is, this involves something like to do that for Hive, for instance, you'd have to have another blockchain who could recognize who the valid block producers are at any given time. So it'd have to watch the history of voting history and things like that to determine the proper block producer and therefore identify valid blocks. And on Bitcoin, it would be more of a matter of analyzing the fork logic and proof of work type stuff in order to figure out valid blocks. So that's one method, and that's probably ultimately kind of the coolest method because it's truly trustless. A secondary method that can be used is some kind of multi-sig key approach, where there's some kind of trusted account that is that's managed by multiple people in a multi-sig way, and that gives some trust based on that multi-sig signature. And of course, one reduced form of that is where there's a single entity that manages that activity. And a lot of this came up in the past on BitShares, because BitShares, the decentralized exchange, and the ability to trade coins from other blockchains was always very interesting and important to people. And so that's where most of my background in this comes. And so the first way that was done was really with that gateway approach, where there's a single trusted entity which issued tokens, proxy tokens, to represent the actual tokens on other blockchains, and they use software to do that. It worked great as long as you could trust that centralized entity who was doing it. And then multi-sig proposals were also looked at as another way. And then there was people always dreaming about using the first technique I mentioned, which is analysis of blockchain data to determine whether when coins are desired to be moved from one chain to the other, and if it was a truthful transaction when that happened. There's also other forms of interblockchain. So those all allow for one-to-one pegging of coins that are transferred from one blockchain to another. So you could in those systems, you're basically trying to have a new coin on the other blockchain that has the same value, if you will, as on the original blockchain. So if you transmitted Bitcoin, for instance, through this mechanism to Hive, then the coin it represented on Hive would have the same value. And that's where a lot of the use cases are, is that kind of pegging of value between blockchains. There's also other forms of, lesser forms of blockchain communication, which are more achievable, or more clearly easily achievable today, such as what people call atomic transfers, or alternatively hash time lock something contracts, I forget the term, HTLC. And that allows for trading of one coin for another across blockchains, but it doesn't allow for pegging the value of a coin across blockchains, which is, like I said, again, what most people are actually interested in. So this is, long story short, true IBC in the sense of pegging is difficult, but with varying degrees of trust, it's possible. And atomic transfers are probably not that difficult at all. I don't think it took too long to implement in BitShares, but I think in practice that use case is not nearly as large. That's my summary of what I know on the topic.
Okay. Well, thank you.
And in the terms of use of implementing it, it's not something I personally want to immediately devote effort to, because it is a large task.
Okay. Okay, nice. Well, I'm sure Good Karma will be happy with that answer. And that's all for that meeting. Do you guys have anything else to discuss?
I don't have anything right offhand.
Okay, cool. Well, that's about it. Almost 1 hour, perfectly timed. Nice. Okay, see you all.
Thanks. Bye.
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 See you. Thank you.